Before maps, the world was a vast, unexplored mystery. Can you imagine the challenges of traveling without a compass or a clue? Now imagine a young man conquering most of the known world. That's Alexander the Great for you. This dude was basically history's biggest overachiever. His empire stretched over 2 million square miles, like going from New York to LA, then conquering Europe for dessert. Alexander wasn't just a conqueror, he was a phenomenon. He took the ancient world by storm, leaving a legacy that still echoes today. Born in Pella, Alexander wasn't your average prince. He craved knowledge like a desert traveler craves water. Tutored by Aristotle, he wanted to know everything. Talk about a clash of personalities. You don't conquer the world by thinking inside the box. He was also a quick study on the battlefield. At 16, he led a cavalry charge at Cheronea. By 20, he was king, his father assassinated. He unified Greece and aimed for the Persian Empire. Alexander wasn't just fighting for land or power, he was fighting for something more. He believed in a vision of a united world, a world where Greek culture and ideas flourished. He saw himself as a unifier, a bringer of civilization. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. To his enemies, he was a ruthless conqueror, a foreign invader who threatened their way of life. But there's no denying Alexander's impact. He spread Greek language, art, and philosophy throughout his vast empire. He founded cities, built libraries, and encouraged cultural exchange. He was like the ancient world's version of a cultural ambassador, albeit one with a really big army. Alexander's legacy is a tangled web of triumphs and tragedies, of brilliance and brutality. He was a product of his time, a time when violence was the norm, and empires were built on the backs of the conquered. But he was also a visionary, a leader who dared to dream of a different world. He died young at the age of 32, his empire crumbling soon after. But his legend lived on, inspiring countless generations of leaders, artists, and dreamers. Alexander was a man of contradictions, a fascinating blend of strength and vulnerability, brilliance and recklessness. He could be ruthless and unforgiving on the battlefield, yet surprisingly merciful towards his defeated enemies. He was a brilliant strategist and a charismatic leader, but he could also be impulsive and prone to fits of rage. He was, in many ways, a tragic figure. He achieved more in his short life than most men could dream of, yet he died believing he had failed to achieve his ultimate goal, to conquer the entire world. Alexander's story is a reminder that history is not black and white. It's a complex tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, idealism, and the human condition. It's a story that continues to fascinate and inspire us, even after more than 2,000 years. So, buckle up, history buffs, because we're about to embark on an epic journey through the life and times of one of history's most enigmatic figures, Alexander the Great. Picture this. You're a young king, barely out of your teens, and you've inherited a kingdom. No biggie, right? Except your dad was a rock star who united the Greeks and built a powerful army. He also had plans to conquer the Persian Empire. Talk about pressure. That's the situation Alexander found himself in. He had some big sandals to fill. The Persian Empire wasn't just some small fry kingdom. It was a massive empire ruled by King Darius III. Alexander wasn't going to waste time with small skirmishes. He was going straight for the jugular. Crossing the Hellespont wasn't exactly a walk in the park. We're talking about thousands of soldiers, horses, supplies, and enough weapons to make a blacksmith blush. Imagine the logistics. It was like trying to organize a music festival, but instead of stages and food stalls, you have legions of heavily armed dudes in chariots. Alexander, being the savvy strategist that he was, used a combination of warships and transport ships to ferry his army across the strait. And guess what? He did it in record time, leaving the Persians scratching their heads in disbelief. It was like showing up to a party early and stealing all the good snacks. But the real challenge wasn't the crossing itself, it was what lay ahead. Alexander was entering territory that was completely foreign to him and his men. They were outnumbered, outgunned, well, not literally, but you get the point, and facing an enemy that knew the terrain like the back of their hand. Talk about a David versus Goliath situation, except David brought a really big sword and a whole lot of friends. But Alexander had a few tricks up his sleeve. He knew that he couldn't defeat the Persians in a straight-up fight. He needed to use his wits, his speed, and his army's superior training to outmaneuver and outsmart his opponents. The first major clash between Alexander's army and the Persians took place at the Granicus River in 334 BC. The Persians, led by a bunch of nobles who probably spent more time primping their beards than practicing their swordsmanship, had chosen their battleground carefully. They lined up their forces on the opposite bank of the river, figuring that the steep banks and the fast-flowing water would give them an advantage. It was a classic defensive position. "Come and get us, Greeks!" they probably shouted, feeling all smug and confident. But they underestimated Alexander's audacity. Instead of waiting for the Persians to make the first move, Alexander did what he did best: he attacked. Leading his companion cavalry, his elite fighting force, he charged across the river, braving a hail of arrows and javelins. Talk about a bold move. It was like jumping into the mosh pit at a heavy metal concert, except instead of sweaty bodies, you have swords and spears flying everywhere. The Persians, caught off guard by Alexander's unexpected assault, panicked and broke ranks. After his victory at the Granicus River, Alexander continued his march through Asia Minor, liberating Greek cities from Persian rule and amassing treasure like a kid in a candy store. It was during this time that he encountered the legendary Gordian knot. Now, the Gordian knot wasn't your average knot, it was a super knot. A knot so complicated that it had stumped the best minds for centuries. Legend had it that whoever could untie this knot was destined to rule all of Asia. Talk about high stakes! People had been trying to untie this knot for generations, poking and prodding it with their fingers using all sorts of tools but to no avail. It was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube after a few too many glasses of wine. Alexander, being a man of action rather than endless contemplation, took one look at the knot and said, "Forget this noise." He drew his sword and sliced the knot in half with a single blow. Boom! Problem solved! Now, some people might call that cheating, but Alexander, he called it efficiency. Besides, it made for a great story, and let's be honest, history is full of leaders who took shortcuts. Alexander's winning streak continued as he marched south along the Mediterranean coast. City after city fell to his army until he reached the island city of Tyre. Tyre was a tough nut to crack. Situated on an island about half a mile offshore, it was heavily fortified and boasted a powerful navy. The Tyrians, known for their seafaring skills and their come-at-me-bro attitude, basically laughed in Alexander's face when he demanded their surrender. "You and what army?" They probably jeered from their impregnable walls. The siege of Tyre was a long and grueling affair, lasting 7 months and testing the limits of Alexander's patience and his army's ingenuity. Building a causeway across the water, using siege towers and battering rams, the Macedonians chipped away at Tyre's defenses. The Tyrians, for their part, put up a fierce resistance, using fire ships, archers, and even molten sand, ouch, to repel the invaders. It was like a scene straight out of Game of Thrones but with less incest and more togas. In the end, Alexander's persistence and his engineers' creativity won the day. The causeway reached the island, the walls were breached, and Tyre fell. Victory at Tyre came at a heavy price. The siege dragged on for months, costing countless lives. The once proud city lay in ruins, a grim testament to ancient warfare. Even Alexander couldn't have been happy about the carnage. Who wants to rule over a pile of rubble? The Tyrians earned Alexander's grudging respect. They fought like cornered lions, defending their city. As punishment, Alexander executed or enslaved thousands. It was a harsh lesson, a warning to others. Amidst the destruction, hope emerged. The capture of Tyre gave Alexander control of the eastern Mediterranean. It was a strategic victory, paving the way for his advance into Persia. For Alexander, it was a time for reflection. He'd proven himself a brilliant commander, but the human cost weighed heavily. He was still young, yet had witnessed immense death and destruction. Could he retain his humanity amidst the horrors of war? Only time would tell. With Tyre secured, Alexander set his sights south, marching his army through Palestine and into Egypt. The Persian Empire was crumbling, its armies scattered. Egypt welcomed Alexander as a liberator. The desert posed a formidable challenge to Alexander's army. Alexander adapted his tactics to the unforgiving environment. He ordered his men to march at night whenever possible. Even in adversity, Alexander's charisma shone through. Stories of his courage and endurance spread like wildfire. Deep in the Egyptian desert, nestled among towering sand dunes and palm groves, lay the oasis of Siwa. This remote oasis was home to the Oracle of Amun, a deity revered for his prophetic powers. Alexander the Great couldn't resist consulting the oracle. He yearned to know his destiny. The journey to Siwa was fraught with peril. Sandstorms, venomous snakes, and hostile tribes threatened them. but the allure of divine knowledge spurred them onward. Alexander entered the Temple of Amun and posed his questions to the oracle. Legend has it the oracle hailed Alexander as the son of Amun, confirming his divine right to rule. After conquering Egypt, Alexander turned east towards the Persian Empire. Darius III assembled a massive army to stop Alexander. They met near Gaugamela in 331 BC. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Victory meant the collapse of the Persian Empire. Defeat meant certain death. Outnumbered, Alexander devised a daring plan. He used superior mobility to outmaneuver the Persians. The battle raged for hours. Alexander led from the front, rallying his troops. As the sun set, Darius fled, abandoning his army. It was a crushing defeat for the Persians. Gaugamela marked the end of the Persian Empire. From conqueror to king, Alexander's army swept across Mesopotamia, capturing Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis. The Persian Empire lay at Alexander's feet. What kind of ruler would he be? Would he embrace cultural exchange or rule with an iron fist? Alexander adopted Persian customs and married Persian women. He integrated Persian soldiers into his army. His untimely death left his dream unfulfilled. The spoils of victory, a king's bounty. Imagine walking into a bank vault the size of a football field, overflowing with gold coins, silver bars, and jewels that sparkle like 1,000 stars. Yeah, that was basically Alexander's life after Gaugamela. Alexander's victory unlocked treasure vaults that would make even the greediest dragon drool. The loot was so vast that it took thousands of mules and camels to haul it all away. He understood that true power lay in using wealth strategically. He generously rewarded his soldiers, ensuring their loyalty and keeping their spirits high. The royal road paving the way for an empire. Ever heard of the Autobahn? The Romans had their roads, but the Persians, they were the OG road trip enthusiasts. The royal road stretched over 1,600 miles, connecting the heart of their empire. It was like the ancient world's Route 66, but with more camels. Alexander recognized its importance for moving troops, messages, and trade goods. He renovated and expanded the royal road, boosting trade and connecting provinces. The royal road symbolized Alexander's vision of an interconnected world. Seeds of discontent, cracks in the foundation. Winning is fun, winning is exhilarating, but winning for years on end, far away from home, that's enough to make anyone cranky. Alexander's Macedonians, those hardened warriors who had followed him through thick and thin, were starting to feel the strain of endless campaigning. They'd signed up to conquer the Persian Empire, not the entire known world. They missed their families, their homes, their comfy beds, assuming they had beds back then. Imagine spending years sleeping on the hard ground, eating whatever you could forage, and fighting battle after battle. Yeah, that'll take a toll on anyone's morale. They'd won glory beyond their wildest dreams, but at what cost? Grumbling turned into open dissent as some of Alexander's most trusted generals started questioning his relentless ambition. They'd conquered Persia. What more did he want? Why push further east into unknown lands against new enemies? Weren't they entitled to enjoy the fruits of their victories? Alexander, blinded by his ambition, his vision of a boundless empire, failed to fully grasp the growing discontent within his ranks. He was so fixated on the horizon, on the next conquest, that he didn't see the cracks forming beneath his feet. The death of Darius, an empire up for grabs. As Alexander ventured deeper into Central Asia, a dramatic turn of events unfolded back in Persia. Darius III, now a fugitive, met an ignominious end. Betrayed by his own men, he was murdered. The news of Darius's death sent shockwaves through Alexander's camp. The Persian king was gone. The war, at least in theory, was over. Alexander, despite his grief, must have felt a sense of relief. But Darius's death created new problems. With no clear successor, the empire was up for grabs. Alexander faced a critical choice: consolidate or push further east. His decision would determine his legacy. Eastward bound, the lure of the unknown. Imagine you're Alexander the Great. You've conquered the freaking Persian Empire. You've got more gold than you can count, more power than you know what to do with. So what do? Kick back, relax, maybe get a pet lion? Nah, that's for boring conquerors. Alexander, ever the overachiever, decided to keep going east. He wasn't just after more land or loot. He was driven by a thirst for knowledge, a desire to see the edge of the world, to map the unknown. Think of it as the ultimate road trip, except instead of a beat-up van and a cooler full of snacks, you've got thousands of soldiers, elephants, and enough baggage to make a Kardashian blush. His men, understandably, weren't thrilled. They'd signed up to fight Persians, not some mythical creatures they'd only heard about in campfire stories. But Alexander, with his usual blend of charm, determination, and maybe a little bit of "because I said so," convinced them to follow him into the unknown. It was a journey fraught with peril. They crossed deserts, scaled mountains, the Hindu Kush to be precise, and those mountains don't mess around, and forded rivers teeming with crocodiles. It was like an episode of Survivor, except with less backstabbing and more conquering. Clash of cultures: Macedonians versus the East. Imagine you've been raised on a steady diet of Greek philosophy, democracy, well, the Athenian kind at least, and the occasional toga party. Now you're trekking through lands where people worship different gods, speak different languages, and have a whole different way of life. That was the culture shock Alexander's Macedonians faced as they ventured further east. They encountered fierce warriors like the Scythians and the Indians, who fought with a ferocity and a disregard for death that shocked even the most battle-hardened veterans. The Macedonians, used to fighting in close formations, relying on their discipline and their trusty sarissas, those long spears, found themselves outmaneuvered by their more agile opponents. And then there were the elephants. Imagine seeing these massive creatures for the first time, their trumpeting echoing across the battlefield, their tusks capable of impaling a man like a shish kebab. Yeah, that'll make you rethink your career choices. The cultural exchange wasn't all about warfare though. Alexander, ever the student of the world, was fascinated by the customs and beliefs of the people he encountered. He consulted with Indian philosophers, adopted Persian court rituals, and even started wearing local clothing. A wedding in Susa: unity or strategy? After years of campaigning, Alexander decided it was time for a break. But this wasn't just any wedding. This was a strategic alliance disguised as a party. In 324 BC, Alexander orchestrated a mass wedding, marrying Statera II, the daughter of Darius III. This was Alexander's way of solidifying his control over the Persian Empire. He encouraged his companions to take Persian wives, hoping to create a unified empire. The wedding was a lavish affair, a merging of cultures, a testament to Alexander's vision. Mutiny at the Hyphasis, the limits of ambition. You know that feeling when you've been pushing yourself too hard, working too much, and you're one bad day away from a meltdown? That's what happened to Alexander's army at the Hyphasis River in India, modern-day Beas River. They'd been marching, fighting, and conquering for over a decade. They'd seen it all, done it all, and frankly, they were done. When Alexander, ever the ambitious one, announced his plans to push even further east into lands rumored to be filled with ferocious tribes and mythical creatures, his men drew the line. They'd had enough. They'd followed him across deserts, over mountains, and through enemy territory, but enough was enough. They wanted to go home. Imagine the scene. Thousands of battle-hardened warriors, their faces etched with exhaustion and defiance, standing up to their king, their friend, the man who had led them to victory after victory. It was a mutiny, a heartbreaking moment for Alexander, a stark reminder that even the greatest leaders are not immune to the limits of human endurance. With a heavy heart, Alexander agreed to turn back. His dream of conquering India, of reaching the edge of the world, would remain unfulfilled. In 323 BC, at the age of 32, Alexander the Great, conqueror of empires, master strategist, and visionary leader, died in Babylon. The cause of his death remains a mystery, shrouded in rumors of poisoning, malaria, typhoid fever, or perhaps simply the accumulated toll of years of relentless campaigning and hard living. Imagine the scene: the young king, his body racked with fever, his voice a whisper, bidding farewell to his generals, his friends, his world. His empire, vast and sprawling, stretching from Greece to India, held together by the force of his personality, his ambition, his sheer will, was left leaderless. His generals, those loyal companions who had shared his triumphs and his burdens, were left to squabble over the spoils, their rivalries, long suppressed under Alexander's iron will, now erupting into open conflict. Alexander's empire, like a sandcastle on a windy day, crumbled, divided among his generals, who carved out their own kingdoms, their own legacies from the remnants of his conquests. But Alexander's legacy, unlike his empire, would not fade into dust. His name, whispered in awe and trepidation, would echo through the ages, inspiring countless generations of leaders, warriors, and dreamers. Before Alexander, warfare was, let's be honest, a bit of a mess. It was mostly about brute force, throwing hordes of guys at each other and hoping for the best. But Alexander, he wasn't about that chaotic life. He was all about strategy, precision, and using every tool at his disposal to crush his enemies. Think of him as the ancient world's version of a chess grandmaster, always thinking several moves ahead. He perfected the art of combined arms warfare, seamlessly integrating infantry, cavalry, and even siege weapons into a single, devastating force. Imagine a perfectly choreographed dance of death, with each unit moving in sync, supporting each other, and exploiting every weakness in the enemy's ranks. His army was like a well-oiled machine, with the heavy infantry, the famous Macedonian phalanx, acting as the anvil, holding the enemy in place, while his elite companion cavalry, the hammer, smashed through their lines, delivering the decisive blow. It was a tactic as old as time itself, but Alexander elevated it to an art form. He understood that victory wasn't just about having the biggest army or the sharpest swords. It was about using your forces effectively, exploiting your enemy's weaknesses, and never, ever underestimating the importance of a good flanking maneuver. Let's take a closer look at Alexander's tactical genius, shall we? Because this guy wasn't just lucky, he was good, really good. One of his favorite moves was the feigned retreat, luring the enemy into a false sense of security, making them think they were winning, and then, bam! He'd spring a surprise attack, catching them off guard and sending them running for the hills. He was also a master of exploiting terrain. Did the enemy have a numerical advantage? No problem. Alexander would find a narrow passage, a bottleneck, where he could funnel their forces and negate their superior numbers. It was like turning a football field into a phone booth, except instead of awkward conversations, you get epic battles. And let's not forget his use of siege warfare. Back then, capturing cities was no easy feat. Walls were high, defenders were stubborn, and siege ladders were about as stable as a drunk giraffe. But Alexander, he brought out the big guns, literally. He employed battering rams, siege towers, and even catapults, bombarding enemy fortifications until they crumbled like a stale cookie. He was basically the ancient world's version of a demolition expert, except instead of dynamite, he used ingenuity, determination, and a whole lot of manpower. Alexander inherited a solid army from his dad, Philip II. But Alexander wasn't content with just maintaining the status quo. He was all about innovation, making it even better. He reformed the phalanx, favoring lighter soldiers with the sarissa. This allowed the phalanx to engage enemies from a greater distance. He incorporated more archers, slingers, and light infantry. A well-rounded army was essential for success. Alexander's reforms went beyond weapons and tactics. He fostered camaraderie and loyalty within his ranks. He led from the front, inspiring his men with his courage. Inspiration across the ages, from Roman emperors to modern generals. Alexander's military genius didn't die with him in that dusty palace in Babylon. Oh no, his legacy lived on, inspiring generations of military leaders, from Roman emperors to modern-day generals. Julius Caesar, the OG Roman badass, was said to have wept at the foot of Alexander's statue, lamenting that he had achieved so much less at the same age. Talk about pressure. Napoleon Bonaparte, the little corporal who conquered most of Europe, studied Alexander's campaigns obsessively, seeing in the Macedonian king a kindred spirit, a fellow master of warfare. Even George Patton, the cigar-chomping, tank-loving general of World War II, drew inspiration from Alexander's boldness, his aggressive tactics, and his ability to motivate his troops. Alexander is the greatest general history has ever known, Napoleon once declared, and who are we to argue with the emperor? Alexander's innovative tactics, his strategic brilliance, and his unwavering determination continue to be studied in military academies around the world, his campaigns serving as timeless lessons in the art of warfare. His name has become synonymous with military excellence, a benchmark against which all other generals are measured. The enduring influence of Alexander's military mind. Alexander's military genius extended beyond the battlefield. His strategic thinking and logistics shaped his empire building. He founded cities like Alexandria, centers of learning and trade. Driven by a thirst for knowledge, he commissioned maps and surveys. He embraced and integrated diverse cultures, His vision of an interconnected world resonated long after his passing, influencing Western civilization for centuries to come. The measure of a man. How do you sum up a life like Alexander's? 32 years of conquest, drama, and audacity, like fitting an ocean into a shot glass. Hero or villain? Share your comments. A force of nature in a tunic and greaves, a kaleidoscope of brilliance and brutality, a product of his time, transcending limitations. Not just ruling by the sword, he yearned to create a united world. His empire unraveled without him, but his seeds blossomed into the Hellenistic age. More than a name on a victory stele, what is the measure of a man, a king, a legacy? The Echo of Footfalls. We still grapple with those questions today, don't we? In a world wrestling with its own share of conflict, ambition, and the clash of cultures, Alexander's story serves as both inspiration and cautionary tale. A reminder that the hunger for power, for conquest, can be a double-edged sword, capable of forging empires and shattering dreams with equal ease. But it's the echo of those dreams, the audacity of vision, that continues to resonate. The idea that we, for all our differences, might find common ground, build bridges instead of walls, and maybe, just maybe, create a world a little bit more in line with the boundless possibilities Alexander dared to imagine. So the next time you open a history book or scroll through the endless river of information that is the internet, remember Alexander. Not just for the battles won or the empires forged, but for the enduring power of ambition, the seductive allure of the unknown, and the timeless quest to leave a mark on the world that whispers across the millennia. If you enjoyed this journey through history, subscribe to @EnchantMinds and like the video.